Okay, welcome back. It is June 19 of 2015. We're going to wrap up Brentano's descriptive psychology. We only need to add one more element from the last lecture, and that is the third moment of return. Brentano states that we return to primary sensate reality with our intentional relation and emotive attachment. The unified plurality in sensate existence is something that we want to imprint in an intentional way with our version of a directional sense that we want to imprint over the sensate existence. That would constitute our theoretical map of equivalence. Now we map the theoretical surface with many lines of dimensional determination, says Brentano, and that makes up our posited correlate of intent. We address the inner boundary of identity. That's what Brentano says really is where we direct our notion of the true. The notion of the true for Brentano is to address the identity of any sensate encounter, and that is the inner boundary of identity that unifies every sensate intuitive point. He says objective reality is a continuum containing a plurality of continua elements. They're all unified by this inner boundary of connectedness. The inner boundary contains many individual sensate points, intuitive points. And those sensate intuitive points strung together in this inner boundary constitutes one singular line of dimension. Our proterosis will perceive the temporal trajectory along with this. We'll be able to see that line of dimension in its trajectory of motion. And so this motion of proterosis is what we want to apply in order to shape the inner boundary of the continuum within sensate reality. He says there is an ultimate species within the objective encounter, an extreme that we can't really fully grasp. It's beyond our ability to grasp or to notice. His concept of noticing. It's due to the barriers of consciousness itself. The continuum of inner boundary is equal to the real for Brentano. Therefore, the notion of the true is really for him the notion of the inner continuum. So the continuum of the inner boundary is what we address in our positing. It contains a universality of an imprinting of its own of the metaphorical light and the metaphorical dark. Those are moral metaphors. It's not really addressing a difference of distance or magnitude. It's more an ethical light or an ethical darkness. And these extremes might not always be immediately noticeable to the subject, but there is an axis point upon which these elements, these extremes, pivot. And that is distinguished within the continuum of that inner boundary. So the genus of light and dark pervades the entire sensate encounter, and the continuum itself, the inner boundary of the continuum, with various degrees of moral saturation. So for Brentano, we return to the sensate encounter in order to address the inner boundary of identity, which is very much for him an inner boundary of the continuum that connects together every individualized sensate intuitive point of interest. They're all unified by an inner boundary. The inner boundary is the area that we would traditionally call the notion of the true. It's another way to say it would be it's more or less, in a way, the ontological structuring of reality that will address inner boundary, the inner boundary that holds and the interconnectedness of every individualized sensate intuitive element of the encounter. And we want to imprint that through the motion of proterosis. We actually are building and continue to revise and continue to posit our proterosis, which is intellectual and moral together, kind of a poetic unity, a motivational unity would be better to say it. And we posit that in order to apply that motion of proterosis over and to imprint the inner boundary of the continuum. That's his notion, the area of the notion of the true. So it's all about a return for imprinting. We return with our new understanding through our previous participation in order to posit a new imprinting over the inner boundary of the continuum with our own trajectory and motion of our own proterosis that we discussed in the last lecture, which is an abbreviated compound term for Brentano. Remember, it took up proteros as former and aesthesis as intellectual and moral insight. So it is that prior motivational stance that we carry. We want to imprint that now with our new understanding over the over the inner boundary of the continuum. We want to imprint it with our own trajectory of our own proterosis that we continue to revise all the time. It's always open to revision. Our own motivational base of attestation is always open to revision as we continue to participate in objective encounters and objective reality and the inner boundary of the continuum that makes up the ontological structuring of the objective reality. So he kind of introduces his notion of the true here in this third moment. Just a very brief little additional note we had to add to our previous talk, and that will wrap up his speculative descriptive psychology or phenomenology that actually concluded on page 126.